Moving Lives Minnesota is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money by the vote of the people, November 4th, 2008.
Lakeland Currents, your public affairs program for north central Minnesota. Production funding for Lakeland Currents is made possible by Bemidji Regional Airport, serving the region with daily flights to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. More information available at bemidjiairport.org. Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Online at nisswatax.com.
Hello again. I'm Jason Edens, your host of Lakeland Currents. Thanks for joining the conversation, and thanks for your ongoing support of Lakeland Public TV. Friends, almost every Minnesotan has a story of origin and migration. In fact, it's one of the things that we all share in common. Most, but not all, Minnesotan families are originally from somewhere else. In fact, in the late 19th century, nearly half of all Minnesotans were either foreign-born or had a parent that was. As part of a statewide initiative by all the PBS stations in Minnesota called Moving Lives, Minnesota Stories of Origin and Migration, I'd like to welcome my guests today, Cheryl Hills and Dawn Espy, both of Region 5 Development Commission, to talk about their initiative called Welcoming Communities. Cheryl and Dawn, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us, Jason.
Thank you, Jay.
I really appreciate it, and I'm really excited to learn more about your effort and how it ties into Moving Lives. So you both work, of course, for Region 5 Development Commission, as I said, in Staples, Minnesota. My first question is, what is an economic development organization doing around welcoming communities? Can you help me understand the linkages between economic development and welcoming communities?
We originally started getting into this work about 3 years ago when we recognized that we were experiencing a workforce shortage within our region. And also just recognizing that a lot of our high school graduates would leave our communities and for the metro areas and places where they deemed more prosperity and more job availability. But we recognized that we needed those folks to stay here, and we needed to be attracting and retaining a qualified workforce for our region. And so part of when we were looking at the fabric of our communities, we recognized that the employers were getting on board with the idea of what they could be doing internally to help attract and retain employees. But part of a community isn't just coming somewhere and working there. It is also about, when you leave work, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? Where do you see yourself? Mm-hmm. And so we thought, the employer side of things is being taken care of really well, but we could maybe help on the community side of things. What can we do to help our communities look more welcoming as well?
Jay, I'll riff off that a little bit. That's absolutely perfect response. And we also identified that having a sense of belonging is a very human inherent need, and to want to stay to a community. You feel like you belong. And so that's part of that welcoming communities piece. But another part of that is being able to be in positions of where you're making decisions about your communities. And that also creates a sense of connectedness. And so we were thinking a lot about how do we work with local units of government, jurisdictions, nonprofits, and others that would not only help people feel welcome when they come to the region, regardless of where they come from or their background, but that they also were willing to start thinking about a shift in control. And I won't use necessarily the word power, but sharing opportunities for all people to be decision makers in spaces like planning and zoning and nonprofit boards and other spaces as other strategies to help people feel really welcome and connected in authentic ways to their community.
Well, why do we need a program called Welcoming Communities? Don't you think that most Minnesotan communities are welcoming?
Well, yes, of course we do. Most communities are, but I think there is sometimes a struggle between one person's understanding of how to bridge cultures and another person's ability and at what level they're able to bridge cultures. And that's really what the crux of the welcoming communities is about, is not necessarily trying to say that any community is bad or have any person try to assimilate to another culture or to another type of lifestyle or value system, but more so, how can we help our communities bridge in ways that honor difference, that appreciate difference, and don't minimize it or try to assimilate into the existing community, because that's where people feel like Well, that's why we departed England, right? I mean, so there's some reasons for wanting to preserve your own culture, whether you're the existing legacy community or whether you're an emerging community, like a Latino community members who move for jobs or others that move to an area for jobs. There is value in being able to take that welcoming nature that we have in Minnesota and extend it to being able to bridge lots of diverse cultures that we might not have otherwise been exposed to, and appreciate the difference of those other cultures. So, Dawn, I'm not sure I really articulated the why and answered Jay's question as to why do we need a program like this?
I was also thinking about when we look at our own person, we may feel like we're very welcoming, but we're in our own community so much, and we just kind of start seeing what you want to see. But in these groups, we're able to dig a little bit deeper, and we're able to look at some populations and some policies or practices or systems that might need to be tweaked a little, because we're so used to doing it this way. But when you bring in folks that may not have grown up here, they might see things differently, and what you're deeming as being a very welcoming thing might not seem welcoming to other folks. And just in simple, phrases that we may use, or ways that we set up our holiday season, or whatever it might be, there's just tweaks and changes that we can make so that the world can see that we are welcoming, and here are those ways that we're being welcoming.
And to the benefit of our ability to be economically competitive, right? That's the tie back to an economic development organization and doing this, what could be considered social work, social justice work, is really helping folks understand that this doesn't mean that you're changing your entire world. It means that you're doing it not only for the good of the people that are moving to our communities, but for the good of our survival in these communities.
So tell me, how does the program actually work on the ground? What are the mechanics of the program? How does someone in some of the communities that you serve, how do they engage in this program? How do they benefit from it?
When we started out with the Welcoming Communities program, we received some funding from Sourcewell and from the Blandin Foundation. And what that first step allowed us to do as a team was to experience what we call the Intercultural Development Inventory Assessment. And this assessment gives us a baseline of how do we work across cultures? What is our cultural competency? We did that as a staff, and our commission also was willing to do that as well, so that we could kind of see, is this a great tool? Is this a good tool that we want to be using to start these conversations? After going through that process, we decided, yes, this was a really great tool to be using, the Intercultural Development Inventory. And so myself, Cheryl, and a couple other colleagues were certified to become qualified assessors. And with the funding then that we received from Sourcewell and from Blandin, we were able to go out into 10 different organizations and administer this assessment. And it was they said, let's do this. It was a cohort of the willing that wanted to go through this initial process with us. And we weren't really sure how, our region would accept it, or would they, be open to this exploration, because it's a little personal. You're looking at your beliefs, you're looking at where your worldviews come from. And we were amazed at the response that we had. And we got through those 10 organizations, nonprofits, local units of government, school boards, just like that. And we knew we're on to something. People are hungry to be able to talk about this kind of a topic, which led us then to be able to work with the Northwest Area Foundation to get some additional funding, which is where we really titled it this Welcoming Communities, in that we were able to work with 6 communities over a period of 18 months. And we have a cohort of folks within each of these communities, 6 to 12 people in each group, making up small business owners, local units of government, members from school boards, students, some of our populations that maybe aren't feeling as welcome in the community as they'd like to. And we meet on a quarterly basis where we'll discuss topics around what is it like to be welcoming? Where do our worldviews come? Why do we see these things the way that we do? And then we start working on a project that can exemplify then how this community is being welcoming to underserved populations. And so we're just getting started on that. We have 5 communities set in place right now that have been working towards this. We're forming a 6th community right now. And most of them are still in the beginning stages of this. We've met 3 times, I think, at this point. So they're really starting to develop those project ideas now that'll exemplify the work.
The communities meet quarterly, and those groups that Don was referring to, and when they meet, they really focus on two things. Jay, they focus on a project that they might want to do that exemplifies how their community wishes to show the world that they're welcoming, and that creates some sort of systems change within their own design, not thrust upon them. But they also spend a little time each of those quarterly meetings exploring more about different elements of how to improve their cultural agility and ability to bridge cultures. And so that two-part approach can be refined by the communities, and we are very much so wanting them to help us create what kind of learning that they partake in to increase their cultural agility. So there's a lot of options for them to choose from, and then we explore other ones that they might come up with. So it's a very co-created, co-designed program, being led by people from those welcoming community advocacy groups, we call them, in those communities. So I'm sorry, what was your question?
Region 5 acts more as a facilitator in these, like Cheryl mentioned. We recognize that each of our communities, they're their own community. They have their own needs, their own population. And so we don't want to have a one-size-fits-all kind of program. And we don't want to come in and say, here's what we think you should do. We want to guide them through that process so that they can come to where they want to come to as a community.
Well, that makes sense. Who exactly are these 5 or 6 communities comprised of? Are these communities of New Americans, Latinx communities? Can you tell me a little bit more about one of these 6 communities?
Sure. When we started, we were able to do a pilot community with funding from Sourceville originally, and that group was our Go North group, and they make up the city of Emily and the city of 50 Lakes, and then 3 townships as well. So they're kind of a mini region within our region, and then those folks pulled in people who would be interested in being a part of this sort of initiative.
So Jay, we also started with very geographic communities, and Don covers all those, but they're geographically based. And as we have learned ourselves through this process of listening to the region, you came to that conclusion intuitively much faster than we did. So we should have spoke to you, Jay, about this a long time ago. But we started to define community differently based upon what other types. So it could be now a local food community, a public health community. It could be a public service community, right? It could be a community defined by religion or by industry or by passion. And so we've started to think differently about how do we go forward with folks. But the geographic communities that Don can list for you, it's important to note that they did have, as she said earlier, private, public, nonprofit, philanthropic, and students all engaged as a consortium of that were the makeup of the representation of those welcoming community advocacy groups. Right, Don? What did I leave out there?
Yep. I guess something that I'd like to mention too with our welcoming groups is we may have that core team of people that get together on a quarterly basis, but those people are all involved in a specific organization or a local unit of government or whatever it might be. So part of their responsibility as that core team member is to bring what we're talking about in that group out to their organizations as well. So it isn't just, these 6 to 12 people sitting in a room making decisions about what's welcoming in their community. They're really bringing it back out to their organizations, and hopefully then that has more of a ripple effect. Another thing we were able to do is when we got these 6 groups together, the first thing we do with them is that intercultural development inventory assessment. So we have this common language. We were also able to offer that then to whatever organization they were attached to. So for example, the city of Brainerd is one of our welcoming community groups. And Mary Sam, who works at Central Lakes College, is one of our community members on that group. So we were able to do intercultural development inventory for the entire CLC management team.
That's ambitious.
Folks, right. So we're able to really continue these conversations beyond that small circle that we're meeting with on a quarterly basis, which has been a great part of this as well.
For context, Don, how many groups and how many individuals have we done in the short, year and a half? Well over 200 and some odd people, right? At least.
Yes.
That we've directly done this with.
Correct. So I think we've administered the IDI to approximately 25 to 30 groups, which encompasses over 200 individuals. And then when they go through the group assessment, they also have the opportunity to do a one-on-one with me or Cheryl, where they can find a little bit about what their own assessment results said. And I've met one-on-one with, I bet, over 80 people at this point within a year and a half.
Well,
So
I've learned two new terms since we started this conversation. One is Intercultural Development Inventory. Is that correct? That's the IDI to which you
Yep.
refer. Okay.
Correct.
And the other one is Cultural Agility. Can you, maybe each one of you, take those two terms and tell us a little bit more about what that means? So this IDI, it seems as if it's very central to your work in welcoming communities. So why is that, and what is it?
The Intercultural Development Inventory is a 50-question assessment. It was developed by a team of researchers many years ago now. So the assessment itself has been around for a very long time. It's available in like over 130 different languages. It's used worldwide. And the reason we really liked this particular tool as an assessment was because it was used so broadly, and no matter where they would use it in different parts of the world, those same kind of results were coming forward on where people are in terms of cultural agility. And so when you're looking at the Intercultural Development Inventory, it kind of places you on a continuum, if you will, to talk about, maybe you haven't had a lot of experience working across cultures. So your cultural agility isn't going to be as great as somebody that's had a lot of experience moving back and forth and in and out of cultures. So when we talk about doing that, we're not talking about, like Cheryl said earlier, assimilating or changing your ways. It's more, here's my culture, here's your culture, and what can we do to be bridging those differences so that we are able to better work together and better communicate. And that's where the cultural agility comes in.
It's kind of a benchmarking process for your cultural agility in a way, then.
Yep.
Right?
And it gives us
without any shame. And that's what we liked about, and how we've really had to make sure that it was respectful. We wanted to make sure that if we brought a tool to Central Minnesota, that it honored the people that were here and where people are at, and that there was no reason for us to come into this conversation about being welcoming with any shame whatsoever. Now, some people may think that's not progressive enough and it doesn't push enough, and if you don't make people feel uncomfortable, then there isn't growth. And I understand that, but that's not the position that the commission wanted to take when we started this work around workforce attraction and workforce. It was to make sure that we help people understand this is where you are. And by the way, that's wicked fine. That's cool. That's okay. Sure. Right. Okay. And if there is a desire for you to think about how you want to personally bridge other cultures, this might be a tool, because when you do the individual assessments with Dawn, you're able to get IDI has this amazing workbook that allows people to say, here's some things that you can do given where you are on this spectrum to think about how to expose yourself to bridging different cultures. And sometimes those are very simple things, like being a mentor for kinship partners, right? Or they're not, then that's a big deal. That's a very big, wonderful commitment. But other times they're less commitments, like reading some information, watching YouTubes, watching TED Talks, interacting with folks that you wouldn't otherwise. And so there's this broad range of things that they offer as suggestions that people can do to think about where they want to be. The last thing I'll mention, Jay, about the IDI that I appreciate very much is it does two things. It tells you where you're placed on the continuum based upon this national model, right, of where you are in terms of being a cultural competency, but it also tells you where you think you are. And typically there's a gap.
Sure.
Between where you really are and where you think you are. And that can go either direction, right? But typically there's a gap. And if people have a desire to want to close that gap so that they can appreciate difference and understand, and that could be difference of low income people or military people or military community individuals. It could be differences that you might associate with urban versus rural. Partners and communities that feel like they need to do a little bit more work about trying to understand worldviews of rural people and that culture, because we have a rural culture versus urban. So it does help you understand where that gap is.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you a roadmap to try to work through a little bit of that if a person chooses to. Some groups that Dawn has worked with, I couldn't be prouder of them. They collectively, as a board of directors, like the Crossing Arts Alliance, talk about this stuff every board meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And they bring up, what are we doing? What do our policies say? How might someone feel uncomfortable given these policies, right?
Mm-hmm.
We give grants out. Everything is done in one way. Is there another way? What if people have learning disabilities? Are we bridging cultures of people with difference? And how does our work, could it be improved to do that in a more effective way to serve our own mission and our own needs, likewise your communities, right? So
culture is not just an ethnic designation or a racial designation, but rather it's a socioeconomic designation potentially, or any number of cultures. You're assessing that as well. Is that what I'm hearing?
We recognize that when we did this work, when we started doing this work, that we don't have a lot of racial diversity within our region. We have the Leech Lake Band to our north, and we have a pretty robust Latinx population within Long Prairie. But in between, it's kind of pretty monoculture.
Sure.
So we recognize that if we're going to start learning how to work across differences, what are some differences that we're seeing within these small communities that they can start to work across those differences, which maybe aren't as daunting as a racial difference or a sexual orientation difference, And so taking those baby steps and starting to grow and practice and learn, and then, continue to ripple out from that.
So what's the project component? I think I understand the principle of your program, but I'm really curious, how does this actually affect Main Street, or how does it actually affect maybe a new American family that's just moved to Long Prairie, for example? Can you actually put a face to the impact of your Welcoming Communities program?
John, in the second way, you talk about a couple of the projects that are coming up in terms of ideas, but the context around why we wanted a project component to this is because we recognize sometimes you need to put on the apron and get in the kitchen and actually cook together in order to create a meal, right? So the practice and doing something, we are a region that likes to see results. And so by creating something collectively that was from the vision of the community, by and for the community, then that allowed us to deepen the work in a different way for those that don't just want to have conversations, that really want to see something done. But cool ideas are emerging right now. What do they look like, Dawn?
Sure. And like I said earlier, we're just in the beginning stages of brainstorming project ideas. One of the groups that we're working with wants to do a youth business contest. And so what this would be is youth are putting together a business plan, working side by side with a mentor who is either a small business owner or a retiree. So kind of that generational coming together, learning from each other, and then allowing these youth to do a pop-up of their business for a weekend so they can kind of experience that as well and see what's possible within their own region. So there we're dividing, we're bridging cultural generations. We're also introducing youth to what's possible in our region. What could you envision, and inspiring that entrepreneurship within our youth. So that's one example. Then we talk about the community of Brainerd. They're wanting to do maybe some sort of race relation discussions and then put together a project out of what those discussions are. Recognizing that Brainerd has more racial and cultural diversity than maybe our Go North group up in the And so just looking at, again, where the community's at, how they want to frame that population outcome within their projects.
I think it's important to note we brought in some expert partners, Jay, on this project. It's not just Region 5 alone. We brought in the partners of Sprout, our regional food hub. We brought in Growth and Justice, who's a group that's helping do rural-urban work across the state. We brought in InSearch, who is our evaluator team partner. We've brought in Rural Renewable Energy Alliance to some extent, and we're transitioning some of those partnerships into even more robust relationships with folks with deeper knowledge in different sectors. And so the projects, when we talk about them with communities, we don't prescribe what they have to be, but it's great for us to bring some ideas to the table. And so some of the ideas we've been bringing to the table have been ideas that advance three, I know this is planner language and I apologize, but local value chains, economic value chains, right? Economic industries, let me say it that way. And those industries are renewable energy, local food and agriculture, and place making, which is arts and culture. And so those three industries have been a focus for us to be able to generate ideas for the communities to say, if you wanted to do a project that showed how you want to be welcoming to specific populations or in general, here might be some ideas of some things that you can do utilizing local foods and that benefit the agricultural economy. Here might be some things that you can do that use creative, place-based, place-making arts and culture projects across the nation that have valued different cultures. And we can talk about those if you want, but that's been our approach, is to make sure that we're coming with some ideas for consideration, but again, created by, because the last thing we want is for a group within this region to say, Region 5 wrote in and they gave this program and they made this project and we didn't need any of that. Right? That's why this needs to be designed by community, so that the control of how this shapes comes from that. And it's a cohort of the willing communities. And by the way, we don't go out banging on the doors asking communities to please, please, please do this. Y'all need this. No, there's a list of communities who want to participate, that want to do this. And so it is, as Don said, a cohort of the willing.
Well, we only have just a little bit of time left, but I want to make sure I ask just at least two more questions. The first of which, is there any resistance to this work?
Well, of course there's resistance, because this is talking about very deep and personal kinds of feelings. And some people feel threatened that when you try to bridge cultures, that you're bringing in people that are not like them. And then therefore their way of living and their culture will be eliminated and extracted. And that fear has shown up by way of folks who have decided that they need to, and they should have a voice to vote and to voice how they don't feel that these programs are needed in the region at all. They tie what we've just explained to you with things like Section 8 housing and immigration status and legal immigration and all those things that are not tied to our work. But we try our best to make sure that we're including folks with those concerns so that they can see and be part of the decisions, to the degree that they decide not to, and they choose to still stand back and try to look through the window and then interpret what's happening without being really truly involved and have that knowledge. And that happens with all of us who are doing work that is, in my opinion, courageous and different.
Absolutely.
And that's okay.
Rapid fire. We've only got a second or two left. Dawn, I'm glad you mentioned the Leech Lake Band. I was going to bring them up as well. We're fortunate to share this geography with the Leech Lake Band. Is the Leech Lake Band participating?
Not at this point, but we're currently putting together a local foods community, and we're really hoping that the band would be a part of that particular.
Excellent.
Yep.
And Cheryl, what does Region 5 look like in the future after you've done this welcoming communities work?
Whatever the region wants.
Fair enough. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining me today. I really appreciate the work that you're doing with welcoming communities. It ties in very nicely with the PBS initiative called Moving Lives, Minnesota Stories of Origin and Migration. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. And thank all of you for joining the conversation again. We look forward to seeing you again. Stay safe, be kind, and be well. I'm Jason Edens, your host of Lakeland Currents.
Moving Lives Minnesota is made possible by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, with money by the vote of the people, November 4th, 2008.